This is a panel on what digital skills do lawyers need to have. I think it'll be a little bit different from what you might expect. I think Kevin did an outstanding job to sort of walk us through his course, giving us very good ideas about a certain angle on what digital skills lawyers should have. I'm going to take it off in a different direction, and then we'll also have lots of comments from our panelists. Let me just make sure that this is okay. So here's just the schedule that we have. We have 90 minutes. I'll do a brief introduction to the panelists. I'll make a presentation based on a recent paper about legal tech education. And I think it's a very nice complementary kind of presentation to what Kevin just gave to us. We'll have 15 minutes for various comments from our panelists about their view on legal tech education, what's needed. We have some questions to the panel. We'll discuss that among the panel, and then we'll take questions from the audience. So we should have plenty of time to get a discussion going. So the panelists, I was already introduced. Thank you very much. Let me also say to Stefan Elder and to Eric Schweighoff, thank you very much for inviting me to serve on this panel, to meet new people and to engage with this overall process. It's really an honor to be included in this. We have three panelists. Rebecca Williams, who's a professor of public law and criminal law at Oxford University in the Faculty of Law. She does research in criminal law, public law, law and technology. And she has a couple of very, very interesting projects going on now. I'm sure she always does, but realizing accountable intelligent systems and AI for English law, which is the area that I kind of already had some contact with her. And it's quite a large project happening in Oxford, and they're making all sorts of progress. And I've given you her email address as well. I've also done these kinds of things in the slides because this is all being recorded, so it's available for later information for people. We have Heribert Anzinger, who's a professor for business and tax law in the Faculty of Mathematics and Economics at the University of Ulm. His research is in business law, corporate tax law, and capital market law. And he has a couple of projects on legal foundations of smart contracts. So he's doing, I guess, Bitcoin and things like that, distributed ledger, maybe. We'll hear more. And also the digitalization of law and applications of data science in law. We have also Martin Wyner, who's a professor of business law at Vienna University of Economics and Business. He's also the director of the Center of IP and IT Law. Let me also say about all of the panelists, there's a lot more on their bios and their CVs than I've covered here, all right? People have lots and lots of things going on. I've cherry-picked a few topics. I hope that's okay. Martin's engaged in research on company law and securities regulation, intellectual property law, comparative law, general business law, contracts, and property law as well. That gives you a little idea of who you're dealing with. Very serious, very hardcore panelists on law and technology. So I've been given the opportunity to make a presentation about some recent work bearing on legal tech education. So I'm going to give a talk about legal tech education considerations for regulators, and I think you'll see very shortly why it's a very different angle about the topic of legal tech education and why it's relevant to the. So I was invited to write a paper for the Legal Services Board. That is the oversight regulator in the United Kingdom for the legal services regulators, which are maybe 10 or 15, I forget exactly how many, regulators of legal services like the Bar Association and the Law Society and various other organizations that regulate legal services in the United Kingdom. And they wanted to have some idea about how legal tech in this current environment should be taken. So this is a paper that's available online for people to read if you want to read it. And the purpose of the talk is just to give you a broad overview about this kind of topic and how it's relevant to this particular issue of what do we do with legal tech education in the current context. So there's a broad brief that I was given that I should propose to regulators what they can do to ensure that legal education addresses the challenges presented by legal tech in order to provide lawyers with the knowledge and skills required to shape and use technology to deliver legal services effectively and ethically, right? That's the overall brief. And they had some very specific issues that they wanted me to address. They want to understand the challenges presented by the use of computing technologies to deliver legal services to consumers, understand whether legal education is currently addressing these challenges and how it may need to do so, and more particularly, to propose what regulators can do to ensure that legal education addresses these challenges, knowledge and skills required to shape and use technology to deliver legal services effectively and ethically, right? And so this is the brief that I had about how to react to what the Legal Services Board wanted to see. So in reaction to that, what I had is 5 propositions which I'm recommending that the regulators, the legal regulators, promote. So you can see why this is rather different from the talk that Kevin gave, because it's very, very top down. We're starting from the point of view of the legal regulators and what kinds of general concepts and issues they should be addressing that then get realized in the course of developing and delivering legal tech courses. So the first proposition is standards for openness, standards for and openness of legal information and processes, integration of professional legal services with government legal services and the judicial system, responsible AI, alignment of legal tech education with the Legal Services Board's regulatory objectives, and then hybrid courses and programs in law and computer science. Now, to a great extent, Kevin's terrific talk really focuses on topic 5 there, focusing largely on machine learning approaches, which is fantastic. But that's where the discussions kind of touch base. So in the course of the paper, and also I'll give a brief outline in this talk, I'll go over each proposition and some recommended actions, and they also relate more deeply to what should be taught and learned in particular courses. So we have standards for openness of legal information and processes. For each of these propositions, there's a rationale. This rationale is increasingly diverse participants are digitally communicating and automatically processing legal information and processes, and there are some underlying trends that drive the need for openness of information and openness and standards as well. So we have trends about standardization, liberalization, globalization of legal services, things like knowledge flow. That is, rather than individual companies owning their particular information, there's a priority on being able to exchange information and just apply different kinds of processes on the information that's available. There's also a large movement about open data and open software, and there's a large movement about open government that's very live in the United Kingdom. This agenda also supports research-led teaching and learning, because teaching and learning require that the knowledge and skills that have to be constantly kept at the forefront of practice and future developments, as well as whatever it is that we teach students have to be materials that they can take with them when they leave the university and they go into practice. So here's just briefly some of the open government values and some of the aims, and these are a bunch of slogans that can be developed further, like efficiency, transparency, accountability, simplification of core government processes and services, etc. These have been floating around for quite some time, and government more or less has been interested in promoting these values. The aim is to promote the quality of legal information and processing for testing. So you want to know, is your legal information consistent? And is it correct? That is, does the system give rise to contradictions? And is the system correct in the sense that does it achieve the required goals? And government and the judiciary have quite a substantial interest in achieving these kinds of goals, aims in the long run. Obviously, we'd like to reduce the costs of public administration, and we would also like to encourage public support for and engagement with democratic institutions. So those values are intended to promote these kinds of aims. We have the integration of professional legal services with government legal services. And basically, the point is kind of obvious, but it's that professional legal services interface with government legal services in the judicial system. There's constant interaction between the sources of information. And if the government is promoting standards for an openness of legal information processes, then the professional legal services are going to be using those standards, using that open information, and thereby basically adhering to those standards and that open information. And so I'll just jump down to this point about there's integrated legal information and processes, because each of these kinds of arms really works off the same base, right? The government makes, publishes, and activates the law. The judicial system adjudicates disputes and violations in regard of the law, and legal services provide advice, guidance, and support for parties about the law. They're each operating essentially, more or less, over the same base of information, more or less being presented in the same kind of way. We have responsible AI, which people have probably heard about, and this is going to have a tremendous impact on legal tech education, I think. The rationale is that the legal system makes use of computer science and artificial intelligence, which must be perceived as responsible, right? It's essential that the public and organizations have trust and confidence in the functioning of the legal system as it is, right? So you need to believe that the government's laws are reasonable and valid. You need to believe that the judicial system delivers on its promise to adjudicate disputes appropriately. And so a system that's using some kinds of automation is also going to need to earn that trust and confidence, right? So, so the way to engender this kind of trust and confidence is to adhere to standards for an openness of legal information and processes, because this will allow the processes to be exposed to the public so that they can understand how the legal system is working and what the impact is on their personal lives. There are other versions about responsible AI. Here's one presentation called Responsible AI Policy Framework, made up of these 8 propositions: that there should be ethical purpose and societal benefit of AI. There should be accountability for the AI system. That is, there should be somebody who in effect is liable for the outcomes of decisions taken by the system. There should be transparency and explainability. That is, the outcomes of the systems should be exposed and available. There should be fairness and non-discrimination, particularly in the preparation of data. We've had a lot of issues about bias in data. There should be inbuilt safety and reliability so that what people say the system does is what the system does. There should be openness and fair competition so that no organizations are being unfairly excluded from access to data or access to processes. There should be an adherence to privacy, particularly about personal data. And the AI should adhere to intellectual property rights, that it shouldn't sort of transgress people's current ownership interests. This is now not working. That's interesting. Okay, we'll just do it that way. There should be an alignment of legal tech education with the Legal Services Board regulatory objectives. So this was, essentially to write the paper so that it was serving what the Legal Services Board has as its agenda, and the agenda is these particular propositions: protecting and promoting the public interest, supporting the constitutional principle of the rule of law, improving access to justice, etc. Right? So these are all very high-level principles, and the idea here is that whatever legal tech education is going to be, it should also play into these statutory objectives. And furthermore, the implication is that these statutory objectives are also the objectives of all of the legal regulatory boards, legal regulatory organizations, subsidiary organizations, right? They also are supposed to adhere to these objectives. Then we can talk just briefly about hybrid courses and programs in law and computer science. So this is really already what Kevin was talking about in some excellent and great detail, that legal tech education must adapt to the changes in the provision of legal services and developments of technologies applied to legal information and services. So it has to change, right? And really, as was discussed by Kevin in his comments, that law schools are very conservative, and the law school students are very conservative in terms of how they engage with legal tech education and there needs to be some change in that, and that's going to be slow in coming. But here's some suggestions, and some of these you've already seen in Kevin's talk, right? Law school students should take scoped courses on computer science topics about, let's say, formal methods, statistical analysis, knowledge representation, and reasoning. Actually, what Kevin has done that's really brilliant is to integrate these topics. We're going to talk about some law and some statistical analysis together in one course. Here it's broken apart a little bit. Also, by the same token, computer science students should be introduced to a limited range of legal concepts and processes. So each side is being introduced to the understandings and knowledge of and skills of the other. There should be projects carried out by mixed teams of computer science, law school, and perhaps management students who have an assignment to complete under supervision. That's exactly what Kevin has been carrying out. And there should be law school courses. And this, I think, is a bit unusual. There should be some law school courses such as criminal law, property law, and so on, which could each have at least one lecture about how legal tech currently applies to that particular area. This is a kind of building in at least a mention of legal tech into every single legal course. And this would go, I think, a little bit towards what Kevin was talking about of how do we publicize this? Well, this is one way to do it. Say, you're teaching a course on criminal law. Hey, here's one lecture about a couple of technologies that are currently in use to pique students' interest going forward. And so there are various aspects of this kind of hybrid analysis, and I want to put this slide up here for a reason. So here's a list of traditional AI topics, right? We have machine learning, search, planning, knowledge representation and reasoning, constraint satisfaction, natural language processing, multi-agent systems, robotics, and perception. Well, except for robotics and perception, the other ones are quite clearly relevant. There has been the last, 5 years, 10 years, an enormous focus on machine learning because there has been enormous advances in machine learning. There are other areas of AI which are well developed and could be and should be and have been applied to legal information. The other point to make, and Kevin already touched on some of this, is that each topic within this has a range of subtopics, techniques, tools, data, formalization, and maths that can be developed further. So this is to say that just as law has many, many subtopics and many subfields, so too does AI. And the challenge that we're faced is crossing over the various topics that we have in the field of law with the various topics and approaches that we have in AI and finding some kind of useful application areas. And one of the ways that I have of kind of visualizing some of this is to think about the spaces of skills and knowledge that we have for different kinds of tools and techniques that students might want to learn. So in the lower left-hand corner, we have emails and search. Right? So still there are students who might need to be taught how to use tools that are available online. And just above that, you might train students to have some interaction with some online tool. So for instance, Kevin was mentioning Luima Search. Well, that's a tool that students could simply learn how to use. They don't actually have to understand very much about the underlying technology, but they could still make use of it feeding off of it. And there are a lot of tools that are going to be provided to law school students like that. There's also in that sort of middle area, you have no code systems and requirements engineering. The idea here is that there are increasingly systems that don't require students to learn how to code in Python in detail, but they can kind of use these Lego-like systems or visual programming environments to visually construct a piece of code, but that gets translated into code that they can actually execute. And then the point about requirements engineering, I think Kevin kind of touched on this, but I'll say it slightly differently. There is in computer science this kind of traditional, how do you develop a piece of software? You go from the concept and you sketch out some diagrams and then you formalize those and then you implement that into a program and then you test it and you revise it. Law school students could be engaged in specific parts of that overall design and development process. That is, from the design process, they are intrinsically involved, and also at the evaluation process, end of it. And then at the upper right-hand corner, you have being a programmer, data analyst, system developer, something like that. This is where people have really sophisticated, well-developed tools. And you could imagine sort of populating this kind of graph, with more detail about different kinds of tools. The other thing I want to say briefly, I think I'm sort of running out of time, but I've got maybe 2 more slides, this one and another one, and then I'll be finished. Just say briefly, I think it's worth giving some attention to something like, I'm not saying exactly this, but something like Bloom's taxonomy of knowledge and skills. That is, what do we want law school students who do legal tech to be able to do, and what should they be able to understand in terms of knowledge and skills? And the taxonomy here is kind of intended to be sort of from low-level knowledge, relatively low-level knowledge, although it can be very elaborate, from knowledge progressing through comprehension to really start to understand what the tool is doing, application, take some abstract ideas and apply them, to analysis, to breaking it down into breaking down some complex activity into its parts, doing some synthesis, taking 2 different kinds of fields of endeavor and putting them together, and evaluation. So at each point of this legal tech education enterprise, we want to ask, what conceptual tools are students getting out of it? We also already have some of the legal tech topics that are probably very familiar. The paper also has a couple of appendices. I'll skip through these. There's some questions at the end of the paper that could be asked of the regulators. Some of these we might come back to with the panelists. And then I just want to make one final remark, is that I really wondered the extent to which the issue that we're dealing with is a technical, a conceptual issue, and how much of it's really a sociological issue at this point. I think that there are certainly, Kevin knows this very well, there are certainly technical and conceptual matters in AI and law that are very difficult to handle and that we're progressing towards very slowly, okay? There are many other topics which actually I think that we do have, given the resources, we can build solutions for these kinds of things. We're already doing some of these kinds of things. The legal tech companies are doing this already. So the limitation, though, is social and political, not scientific. We need to focus and organize resources to collaborate on scale to solve common problems. And this is actually, I think, the greater hindrance than some of the scientific problems that we've got. So thanks a lot for your attention to this.